From Calamba to Europe for the second time. On February 3, 1888, Rizal was forced to leave Philippines for his family's safety and for his own too, because the friars had a bad eye for him. Rizal left for Hong Kong and arrived in the British colony on February 8, 1888. In his letter dated February 16, 1888, he took time to inform Blumentritt of what had happened to him during his 6 month stay in his hometown. Rizal met other exiles in Hong Kong. Also, he became acquainted to some important Spaniards based in there. For almost a month, Rizal stayed in the Spanish legation. Rizal had some observations about Hong Kong. He said that the celebration of the Chinese New Year was quite noisy because of firecrackers on the streets. He also mentioned the Laureate Party, an event wherein the guests were served a variety of dishes, showcasing the hospitality of the Chinese. From Hong Kong to Japan. On February 28, 1888, Dr. Rizal arrived in Japan through Yokohama. For a few days, he stayed at Tokyo Hotel, then moved at the Spanish legation and stayed there for almost a month. During his stay in Japan, he learned to speak Nippongo and studied Japanese art and culture. Rizal was overwhelmed by the city of Tokyo. Rizal admired the beauty of the country as well as the discipline and the courtesy of the people there. He also admired the charm of the women of Japan. In contrary, seeing the kuruma or the rickshaw being pulled by the Japanese men dismayed Rizal. Rizal's romance with Osei-san. When Rizal moved to the Spanish legation, he saw a fine-looking maiden passing the gate of the legation, and he was charmed by her beauty. Her name was Seiko Usui, or Osei-san. Through the gardener of the legation, he learned that almost every afternoon, Osei-san passes the legation. One day, Rizal and the gardener waited for her, and because of the gardener, Rizal came to know the maiden. Rizal saw in Seiko the ideals of womanhood, which made him even more attracted to her. Their friendship developed into a deep and sincere relationship. They spent their days together, making wonderful memories. Osei-san even invited Rizal to a chano, a traditional tea ceremony that symbolizes harmony, purity, tranquility, and reverence. Because of their love, Rizal was tempted to stay in Japan for good. But still, his duties for his countries overcame his feelings and decided to leave Japan and his love Osei-san. On April 28, 1888, Rizal arrived in the United States. Rizal, as well as the other passengers, was not allowed to get off until May 4, 1888. He discovered that the hold was because the election in San Francisco was being held and they had 600 Chinese on board. The government was making a great show of adopting thorough measures against Chinese to get sympathies and, of course, the votes of the people. Rizal and other first-class passengers were allowed to land after a few days, while the others, especially the Chinese passengers, remained on board. Rizal stayed in San Francisco for 2 days. He left for Oakland and passed to different states like Sacramento, Reno, Chicago, and many more. His trip across the continent of America ended upon his arrival in New York. Rizal had some impressions of the United States. Some good impressions include the natural beauty of the country, its progress, the energy of the Americans, and their high standard of living. Some negative impressions were racial discrimination and giving too much importance on money. Rizal left New York on May 16, 1888 and was headed for England. Rizal arrived on May 24, 1888 at Liverpool, England. He stayed for a night there and then he moved to London. Rizal lived in London from May 1888 to March 1889. He decided to stay there because he wanted to improve his knowledge of the English language, to study and annotate Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, and to safely fight against the Spaniards. Rizal stayed at the residence of Dr. Antonio Regidor, a practicing lawyer in an exile of 1872. After several days, he lived as a boarder at the Becket family. During his stay in London, he became acquainted with the librarian of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Reinhold Roost. Dr. Roost was the one who recommended Rizal to undertake his research at the British Museum. Because of Dr. Roost's recommendation, Rizal was allowed to perform a study of Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. Bad news from home. While Rizal stayed in London, he received some bad news coming from the Philippines. Here are some of the unfavorable events. Persecution of the Filipino patriots who signed the anti-fire petition. Persecution of Calamba tenants, including his family, for their courage to petition the government for reforms. Exile of Saturnina's husband, Manuel Hidalgo, to Bohol without due process. Furious attacks on Rizal by Senator Salamanca and Vida in the Spanish Cortes. Arrest of a medical student in UST for fighting copies of Nolly in his residence. Romance with Gertrude Beckett. Rizal had another love interest during his stay in London. She was Gertrude Beckett, also known as Toddy or Sisi. She was smaller than Rizal and she was chubby, just like Segunda Katigba. She was not that pretty compared to Leonor Rivera, but Rizal was attracted to her because of her propinquity and happy family. But when Rizal learned that Gertrude was falling in love with him, he held back his feeling for her. Rizal falling in love with Osei San and Gertrude implied that he was not desperately in love with Leonor. Founding of Asociación La Solidaridad. The Asociación La Solidaridad, a patriotic society that shall work for reforms from the Spanish government, was formally established on December 31, 1880. Although Rizal was not present during the founding of the society, he was chosen as the honorary president of the Asociación La Solidaridad. This means that Rizal, at this point of time, was already recognized as a leader by the Filipinos in Barcelona. On February 15, 1889, Rizal was informed about the founding of the organ of propaganda movement by Graciano Lopez Haina de la Solidaridad. This organ of the movement aimed to work peacefully for political and social reforms, to portray the unwanted condition of the Philippines under the Spaniards, to advocate liberal ideas and progress, and to champion the aspirations of the Filipinos to life, democracy, and happiness. The foundation of the La Solidaridad became Rizal's outlet of his innermost feelings, thoughts, and ideas. His first article published in La Solidaridad was Los Agriculturos Filipinos, wherein he described the poor condition of our country under the rule of the Spaniards. Visit to Paris and Madrid. Rizal visited Paris early in September 1888.
to search for the historical materials in the Bibliotheque Nationale. He met there Juan Luna and Paz Pardo de Tavera. Luna became his host during his visit in Paris. After his extensive research, he went back to London. After that, Rizal went to Madrid and Barcelona on December 11, 1888. It was in this visit that Rizal had an opportunity to contact the members of the Asociación La Solidaridad and discuss the extent of their agitation for reforms. Other writings in London. Aside from the annotation of Morga's Sucesos, Rizal wrote other several articles during his stay in London, one of which is the essay entitled La Virgen del Fray Rodriguez. He wrote this essay as a form of reply to Father Rodriguez's attacks on his novel Nolo Me Tangere. He demonstrated in this writing his insightful knowledge of religion. Another famous writing that Rizal wrote was the letter to the young women in Malolos upon the request of Marcelo H. del Pilar to commend the young women of Malolos for their courage to establish a school where they could learn Spanish despite the prohibition of their parish priest, Father Felipe Garcia. Rizal, inspired by Dr. Rose, also contributed two articles in Trubner's Record, a journal dedicated to the literature of the East. One of the articles was the Specimen of Tagal Folklore, a collection of 14 proverbs, 8 puzzles, and 2 verses. The other article was Two Eastern Fables, a writing that compared the Japanese to the Filipino fables. Goodbye, London. Rizal left London for Paris on March 19, 1889. Some said that the reason why he left London was because he wanted Gertrude to forget him. Before leaving the city, he carved some sculptural works such as Prometheus' Bond, Triumph of Death over Life, Triumph of Science over Death, and the carving of the heads of the Beckett sisters.